Yo, we are back once again. This is the Wu-Tang podcast. I am Singard Superior. The almighty AR is still on hiatus, but nonetheless, I have a very special guest with me on this episode. I have Paul Cantor, who is a writer, editor, and music producer. You can find some of his writing on Vice, Mass Appeal, Complex, Rolling Stone, MTV News, Billboard, Gawker, just to name a few, and everything like that. So, Paul, how you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, no doubt, man. Thanks for coming on. And if I am correct, you are from Staten Island, right?
Yeah. I'm from Staten Island. I was a producer. I still am a producer. Before I really was a writer. I grew up in Staten Island. I had a studio there in the early 2000s, and I actually recorded some Wu-Tang projects in my studio. I've worked with, different members of, Wu-Tang, some of the 9 members, and then some of the affiliated guys. So I have a lot of Wu-Tang connections, despite the fact that, I've written about them, and I've interviewed them, and I've done, a million different things with those guys, just based on, being from Staten Island and then, just being in the music industry, so to speak.
You're the first person from Staten Island to come on the podcast, and I'm just curious to know if you can remember it all. What was like the time like when, Wu-Tang came out, and, what did that mean for Staten Island during the period?
I mean, it was everything. Like when Wu-Tang Forever came out, that was probably one of the, most life-altering experiences that, a person could have as like a teenager coming from, a borough that is largely, overlooked or forgotten because Wu-Tang itself was really big, in the years after they debuted, but the hype around Wu-Tang Forever, was a real pop culture moment, where pretty much it was broadly, influential through, across like a whole bunch of different things. They were like on MTV, and it was just a groundswell of support. So I remember the day Wu-Tang Forever came out and everybody actually missing school to go get it, because you had to go to the record store. And there was a friend of mine in my school. I went to Port Richmond High School, and he worked in one of there's not that many independent record shops on Staten Island, but he worked in one of the main ones. And I remember us all, like almost our entire, senior class. Well, I wasn't a senior yet, but I mean, almost everybody missed school for that, so, I mean, it was incredible, man. Like, I think about that period often. It was like, very influential in my life because, it was like one of the few times where you were from actually mattered, and that's important when you're a kid.
Yeah, I can imagine because I'm from Baltimore originally. I really only get to go back like once a year nowadays for the moment at least. But yeah, I can only imagine. Baltimore hasn't exactly had like that breakout, sensation or star. I mean, of course we've had like local, music celebrities and everything like that, but no one that has like broken out on a really big commercial level. And it's funny that you talk about everyone skipping school and everything like that for the occasion during the period because well, first of all, if you guys haven't realized, this episode is on Wu-Tang Forever, the first disc of Wu-Tang Forever, to be a bit more specific. And I had Chris Piersnick on the show to discuss disc 2, which you guys will hear soon. And he said the same thing about people skipping class, but if I recall properly, it's been a while. I think he said that he didn't miss school. I think he did say that.
I didn't miss school either. I remember going to get it after school. I mean, which, it's like no disrespect to like anybody that missed school, but I'm Facebook friends with a lot of those people now. And, A lot of them ain't doing too much with themselves, which I think says a lot about their priorities. you know, so
Yeah.
like it was it's just I didn't skip school for whatever reason. I figured it could wait, but a lot of other people did. I skipped school for a lot of other fucking reasons and a lot of other dumb shit, but that I did not skip. I barely even went to school for a couple of years, but at that time that was not a valid reason to skip it.
Yeah, I mean, hey, I think all of us have skipped school in one way or another for whatever reason it was, for just for experimentation or whatever. I had the chance to go to Staten Island once, and I mean, it's not really anything, not I don't even know if the story is really worth telling. I'm gonna say it anyway because I had the chance, I had the opportunity. I was like doing some kind of like fellowship school kind of stuff, and I was in New York for about 6 weeks, and that's like my first time like really like being in New York. I've been there before, but like actually being like just being a part of it for the moment. And I wanted to go to all the 5 boroughs, but I was really caught up in making it to Staten Island more so than anything because of the fact that Wu-Tang came from Staten Island. So I felt like I was making like a pillage to Staten Island just to see what it was like. So yeah, it was like a big moment for me personally, being how old was I, maybe 21, 22, yeah, I think 22, and taking the ferry over and then just having that experience. I tried to walk, because like it's where the ferry like lets you off, it's like by that baseball park, if it's still there. I'm assuming it's still there. Yeah. So I tried to go deeper into the interior of Staten Island when people started looking at me, and I didn't have like anyone to vouch for me or anything. So I just kind of stayed where I was and smoked a cigar, and then I left. But I feel like I made the trip for the sake of Wu-Tang. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, totally. I mean, a lot of people. I mean, there's that great scene in the movie Black and White, right, where they go out to I don't know if you've seen that, but they go out to, quote unquote, the wall to see, the graffiti, like the memorial for 2 Cent and, the Can It Be Also Simple stuff and all that. And I feel like a lot of people who are fans, whether they're from the States or they're from Europe. I mean, people, always go to that area. That's like a hip hop destination. You know what I mean? It's like going to see Biggie's house or something. You just have to go by. If you're just a passionate fan. You know what I'm saying? And Staten Island is very difficult to navigate if you don't really. If you're kind of like by yourself, it's just not it's not a very walkable place, to get to that area, like Stapleton, Park Hill, from the ferry, you could take a cab or whatever, but I mean, it's still like, 20, 25 minutes, even on a bus, 30 minutes, and it's maybe, I don't even know, it might, it might be more than one bus you have to take. And it's not, I mean, no disrespect, but it's not the best area to be just walking around in. You know what I'm saying?
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, it's not, look, I think you could walk around there and you wouldn't have a problem, but generally speaking, you know what I'm saying? Like, I could see how somebody, who's not from there, would be like, yeah, I'm cool, man. I don't need to venture into that part of, it's not that serious.
Now, this is a question that I've always had. Is there like anything that are there any characteristics that the clan itself that they have that just like screams Staten Island?
Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot. I mean, for one, the language that they speak, is very much like a. I associate that with Staten Island, but it's more of like a 5 borough slang that I don't think you will hear it as much now. I mean, you might hear it, a little bit, if you are around some older folks, people in their, let's say their mid to late 40s, early 50s, who might be from a different era, like like a 70s and 80s, era of New York. But a lot of, people from Staten Island are like transients, they're people who came there from other boroughs. So they were born in, let's say, Long Island or the Bronx or Brooklyn. And then their parents like kind of moved to Staten Island in search of, kind of like more of a suburban type of situation. It was maybe a little bit cheaper. And it's more of like a working class borough, but with a little bit less, shall we say, crime than like maybe the Bronx had in the 70s or 80s. We still had a lot of crime, it just relatively speaking, it was less, So the way those guys talk, that is, and the way they rap and a lot of the slang they use a lot of language that is, like 5% speak. But I don't, even though it is 5% of speak, it's at the same time, that's just like black street language of the 70s and 80s. You know what I'm saying? Like, a lot of people, from that generation, kind of like talk like that. You know what I'm saying? Like, I was just in a Chinese restaurant like 2 days ago, and like a couple of older black guys walked in. They had to be in their 50s, and like the way they were talking was like, it reminded me of how like a Wu-Tang rap song would sound, because it was just that like that street talk, that that slang, that they had not shaken off, you know what I'm saying? But and those dudes, like, they just embraced that and put it on record. A lot of it now has been mainstreamed, you know what I'm saying? Like, because Wu-Tang was so popular, a lot of that slang kind of just became a part of the vernacular, and the way people speak. But you really, I'm not, it isn't to say like nobody had ever said, the word God or any of that stuff, like, on records, because like Rakim and people like that had, but they were kind of like, they really popularized it to another level, and they aren't even the first people to do like the 5% stuff. I mean, like a lot of rappers had already done that. It's just they kind of like really, hammered it home. But people on Staten Island are just nerdy as fuck, man. They're, it's like a very, it's an isolated place. So people are very much like, are very much into, comic books, or at least they were back then, comic books, and just a lot of reading, a lot of like what I consider to be like street intelligence, just people educating themselves and passing, books and, different learnings on, through like almost like a hand to hand, each one teach one type of situation, and where they all come from, what I'm saying, that area is a little more densely populated, because like if you go out to like the South Shore of Staten Island, it's dense, but it's houses, so people aren't really, they're not necessarily on top of each other, But if you live in Park Hill or Stapleton or West Brighton or New Brighton or any of those places, despite the fact that they have changed a lot in recent years, you're still really in a public housing project, you know what I'm saying? And there's just when you're in a building with 500 families, you know what I'm saying? Like everybody is a lot closer, and there's just a lot more talking going on, you know what I'm saying? So I think a lot of that way that they are is definitely indicative of like a Staten Island thing. It's like half like real urban, like street talk, but then like this kind of like isolated, almost weird, oddball way of looking at things, which I think is in terms of like the names and the whole mythology of Wu-Tang. I think they were able to even think about that shit because there was just so much time for them to just be alone, because that's just the way Staten Island is, like you could sit in your car for 5 hours and not see a person, you know what I'm saying? like, you can't do that in a lot of other places, so, yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like, and aside from, dealing with, some of the members and the affiliates personally, via the studio, and you being from Staten Island yourself, I also realized that you are in the acknowledgments to Alvin Blanco's book on RZA and the Wu-Tang Clan.
Oh yeah, that's right. I do remember. Yeah, I think he had asked me a couple questions for that book. He also did a reading, like a Q&A thing. Actually, it was just a Q&A, but he did that out in Staten Island, and I think Red Bull actually was the sponsor. Ghostface and Raekwon and Cappadonna, and I believe Inspector Deck. That might have been all, but they all came, and he kind of like interviewed everybody. So that was really cool. That was probably about 5-6 years ago, maybe 7. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember. I think it was through the Red Bull Music Academy, and I remember watching that and everything like that. But for you listeners out there, if you guys haven't checked that book out, you probably should. Alvin Blanco's the Wu-Tang Clan and RZA Trip Through the 36 Chambers, if I'm saying that correctly. But yeah, that's where I get a lot of my information from for this podcast. Aside from the many articles that I read and peruse and everything like that that I can find, but that's like the epicenter. That book and Alvin Blanco's book and of course the Wu-Tang Manual, which are like the pillars of this podcast, I would say. What people in the clan have you worked with, and some of the affiliates also?
It's funny. Before, like about an hour before we were set to do this, I was actually trying to remember everything. So because some of it is quite a bit in the past, but I did a couple of records on Ninth Prince's first, like one of his solo albums. I'm trying to remember the name of that album.
Granddaddy Flow?
It wasn't on. It was the one after Granddaddy Flow.
Oh, okay.
I did some stuff, a bunch of stuff with Trife and a lot of the Theodore Unit guys. I've engineered a little bit for Raekwon. We recorded a You God album in my studio that I used to have, which was the album The Hillside Scramblers.
Yeah.
I did produce a record for You God. Let's see what else. I'm probably forgetting some stuff, but a lot of it was like in the early 2000s, and it's not that fresh in my memory, but probably some other stuff with Raekwon, because I had a lot of different connections with him. Like Ray was very much, in touch with like a lot of stuff on Staten Island for a period of time, and he still is. I think I did some stuff with Ghostface, but I don't think it ever came out. Like I think the stuff got recorded and just is just sitting in a studio somewhere. Ghostface's longtime manager Mike Caruso. Like I grew up like playing basketball with him, and he's now like manages like 50 Cent, and and he himself is like an interesting character with a long colored history of in New York City. So it's just just being on Staten Island, you always have a lot of different connections to these guys. But one funny story I have is I remember in maybe 1998 or 1999, I think it was 98. I remember because I started out rapping, and I remember like seeing Cappadonna in the Staten Island Mall, literally just rapping for him for like 10 minutes straight, and right, in the middle of the mall, and him, really, digging it. And then probably a couple years later when he put out his second album, I remember he had a little in-store at that same record store that I was talking about earlier that my friend worked at. They did an in-store for him for his album, I think it was called The Yin and the Yang. Mm-hmm. And I went and I gave him like my little demo. So I had like a little demo then, and I was like, "Hey man, remember me?" And he was like, "Yeah, I do." So yeah, it was kind of like it was just like a lot of crossing paths with those guys. But Ninth Prince I used to talk to pretty regularly. You know what I'm saying? Then he went to jail for a bit, and I kind of like fell out of contact with him. Oh, I did a bunch of stuff with Shyheim. Who's in jail now too, unfortunately. I did a number of songs on his album. I think it's called The Greatest Story Never Told. All of this stuff, came out like kind of after, after they were like super popular.
Hmm.
'Cause I'm a little younger than those dudes are. You know what I'm saying? I'm 35. So Shyheim himself might be like 40 now. You know,
Hmm.
so I think we did that stuff in maybe 2003. I mean, when he had just come home from jail the first time. So yeah.
I mean, it's so interesting because like in Baltimore, Cappadonna was in Baltimore at one point and everything like that. And so, I've never seen him in person, but I will always have like, my brother or whoever it would be, like would see him at the mall or whatever. And other affiliates who are always around. But, so another, like, I mean, you've done like so many different things that, of course, I guess we just can't really touch on because of time. But you like startups. I think you had like a podcasting startup that I would love to talk to you about. I mean, one at some time moment or whatever like that. But to talk about music production, because music production is kind of like how you got into writing, and I'm curious to know because I know I guess with anybody your setup has changed over time, and me being a music producer myself, I'm curious to know what your setup is right now and like how it has changed over time because I read somewhere that you were like using Ableton. Is that still correct?
Yeah. A couple of years ago, I kind of moved away from using a lot of hardware and stuff like that. MPCs and I have a lot of keyboards and stuff, but I don't really use them anymore. I just use a lot of plugins and stuff like that. But for the most part, yeah, I just use Ableton. Before that, I was mostly using Pro Tools. I was making beats, in Pro Tools itself. Usually with like, let's say Reason or something like that, rewired into it, and then it just became a little bit. Some of the workflow was not moving as fast as I'd have liked, so I switched to Ableton, which is just a little bit. I wouldn't say it's that much quicker, you know what I mean, but definitely like a little snappier than Pro Tools for sure. But yeah, that's pretty much what I'm on now, and I just use a piano, like an electronic piano that is my controller, so to speak. I don't really like MIDI controllers or anything like that. I mean, I like weighted keys, and I like to play, so that's what I use. Yeah.
So now does writing take up most of your time, or is it like kind of split between music production and writing?
I haven't been doing as much production as I'd like because, well, I got married like 2 years ago, and just I'm kind of like I don't know how you would describe it. Just I'm in kind of like in between spaces. We're in an apartment now, which is a little bit different than where I was living before, and just some of your activities change. I think when your life changes. So I still make beats and I'm still producing, but I have to say I'm not on it as much as I was. Like I go through periods where maybe for a week or two I'm really dialed in. And it's kind of like playing basketball. If you haven't shot the ball in a couple months, I mean, you need like at least 3-4 days just to get your rhythm back. Just so you can kind of even feel the way the ball feels in your hand and everything is moving nicely. So I just go through periods where I'm really productive. In terms of making beats. And then, writing, I try to do every day. I think also some of it is age as well. You know what I mean? Like you just get a little older and, like the music that's speaking to you is a little bit different, right? Like, I had a couple years where I wasn't really making a lot of beats. I was just learning how to play music because I didn't really know I didn't even know anything about I mean, I had very basic knowledge of just how to play, but I had no real skills with my fingers or anything like that. So I was just really into classical music and a lot of jazz and a lot of a lot of things that are more just musical. Hip hop is like, it's not to be disrespectful towards it or anything like that, but it is very, in terms of the arrangements and stuff like that, it can be very simple.
Mm-hmm.
So making a rap beat, I can make 100 rap beats in a week. You know what I'm saying? Like, but it could take me like a week just to do the arrangement on one pop song. You know what I'm saying? So it's like, it's just a different skill set that you need to build. So at a certain age, maybe like when I was about 25 or so, 26, I realized like, okay, I'm good enough at making beats, right? What I'm not good enough at is I'm not a good enough arranger, and I can't play well enough, and I'm not a good enough songwriter. So I just wanted to spend, some time learning how to do that. And so I kind of was involved in that for a few years. Yeah, I mean, I'm just like a lot more into music now, like music itself than, production, so to speak. Writing has its own rhythm to it. And you could be like typing a sentence, and you got a beat in your head that you're kind of going to, and nobody else can really hear it, but you can. And when the words come out on a page and a person reads them, in some way it's like a music of itself. So it's all very related. And so maybe the money is not, but but to me it's all connected, man. Like, a creative life is all 360 degrees of just being a part of the world. So yeah.
I agree, and I guess in certain ways I kind of sort of write for a living, but I'm kind of, I feel like the same way. Like sometimes I want to make a beat, but I know that if I start doing it, I'll be sitting around all day working on beats rather than maybe doing certain things that are a bit more needy, I guess, when it comes to certain needs that I need to fulfill, maybe deadlines or whatever like that. So, I totally see what you're saying. And, what's so interesting about like hip hop production is that it is simple, but then it can be complex. And I remember like going back to like Red Bull Music Academy, and I remember, LP was on there from, Def Jux or whatever. And he said that the thing about a hip hop producer is that, they take from so many genres, and they have to, so they have to listen to all these different genres and to, in order to learn how to sample different things or go about, or to at least like learn different structures and how to sample from different genres that have, particular structures in order to expand their sound or whatever you want to call it.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with him. It depends like on the kind of producer you are. Like I have a very large record collection. You know what I'm saying? And I still buy records, not as often as I'd like, but records are very expensive nowadays. It's kind of like a boutique product. It's like a premium on records. All of a sudden, because it's like, people know that it's kind of like a hip item. But I also have, a lot of like MP3s and things that I've downloaded, and the knowledge that you attain, if you're like a sample based producer, you become kind of a music historian in a lot of ways, because and that's, I'm going to make another point right after this that just bear with me for one second. You become a music historian because you kind of like, you study these records and you study years, and you study, like if let's say like the year 1976, people were using these types of instruments in 1976. Like certain instruments weren't developed yet, right? So they're, like this type of guitar and this processing, was used on the guitar, So and you know that the type of guitar that would be played, the style of music that you want to sample, it came out of let's say Ohio, and so now you're going to look for like every record that somebody made that came out of Ohio, and then what does that lead you to? That leads you to like basically a funk history of Ohio. You're like now you know all this information about funk bands and the funk scene and like all these different people, from Ohio, and through knowing that history, now you get a history of the communities there, and now you get a history of, let's say, black communities, and now you get a history of how black communities interact with white communities, and now you get a history of America. You know what I'm saying? And it's like just through, you learn so much just from like going to look for records. So people who are sample-based producers are geniuses. You know what I'm saying? Like, their level of knowledge is often, very deep if they're people who really, get into it in that way. Not everybody does. You know what I'm saying? I'm just speaking from my own experience. But like each time you go and look for a record, you are kind of unfolding a piece of history, you know what I'm saying? And every time you peel it back like an onion, you get to the core of what that time period and that experience was like for those people, and that it goes over so many different things. I mean, it goes from the arrangements on the records, the instruments used, the style they're playing in, the sound of the record itself, how it was recorded. But the next point I was going to make was that stuff aids you if you're into writing, you know what I'm saying? Because, the more you nerd out over this stuff, I mean, the easier it is for you to write about music, right? Because you have all this, knowledge of it. A lot of people who are into, a lot of hip hop producers who are into, making beats in that way are, I'm not trying to slight anyone, you know what I'm saying? It's just something I've noticed, they are a little more culturally aware than a lot of the people I know who, are classically trained. And those guys may be very astute, at a certain, piece, element of music, which is the composition and stuff. But I think because they probably are listening to classical music and all this stuff that's kind of been institutionalized, they miss out a little bit on, just shit that was popular and that was like jamming in whatever town that somebody was making funk records in whatever year. I go through periods where I'm just listening to like weird fucking like Egyptian disco music and shit like that. You know what I'm saying? Any country I go to, I'm just trying to find the weirdest shit. I'll go to any record store and just be like, what is the weirdest shit you have, and that's what like I'm looking for. So yeah, I agree with you.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying the episode. Since you got this far, I wanted to let you know about my other show, the Channel 10 podcast. On Channel 10, I have intelligent discussion on hip-hop culture and current social issues with guests from the hip-hop world and beyond. Expect to find intriguing interviews with hip-hop pioneer Schoolie D, New York Times bestselling author D. Watkins, and civil rights activist DeRay McKesson. Find Channel 10 on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Now back to the show.
Let's dig a bit into Wu-Tang Forever. And the first disc, I mean, I guess we can just have a general conversation with Wu-Tang Forever if you want. So Wu-Tang Forever, 1997. This is kind of the, this is like the winding down of RZA's 5-year plan and everything like that. And it's also a pivotal moment, for the Clan in RZA, right? The Clan being at their commercial peak. And RZA, delving into learning how to, do music in a more traditional fashion. So you have more experimentation from RZA when it comes to that kind of when it comes to that kind of stuff. But also, I would say that, of course, obviously, there's more money to be made, more money that the clan had at the moment, and so this album is mixed differently than the other ones, the other, solo albums, and the first album, 36 Chambers, that came before it. But I do think that this album is also mixed. It just has a different mix out of, like, I think all of the clan albums, and it's a mix that I don't necessarily care for, if I do say so myself. But with you, Paul, I was looking at your 20 best Wu-Tang albums of all time, and I can only imagine how hard that was, because you were looking at all of the Wu-Tang solo albums, the Wu-Tang Clan albums, and some of the affiliates. And it seems to me, after reading what you said about certain albums and like where you place Wu-Tang Forever, I think I came to the realization that I think Wu-Tang Forever is one of the more divisive albums in the entire Wu-Tang universe, because it seems to me that some people, they love it. They think it's one of the best albums ever. Some people kind of just generally dislike it for certain reasons, and some people they kind of have like a love-hate relationship with it, which I think you have in certain respects. And also, I was interested in that you didn't place it as higher as I thought you would, but it's still up there at the top. So generally, what are some of your loves and dislikes about that album, about Wu-Tang Forever?
Could I ask you a question though? Where did I place it in that list? Because I think I wrote that a couple years ago, and it's not that fresh in my memory.
Oh yeah, it was a while. Number 5, if I'm correct.
Oh, and number 1, if I'm not mistaken, is Only Built for Cuban Links, right?
No, 36 Chambers, Only Built is number 2.
And is Supreme Clientele number 3?
I believe so. Yes.
Got you.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, that's kind of like my top 3. Well, I mean, I think Wu-Tang Forever is like a really, really, really good album. It's definitely in their top 5 or 6 records. And in terms of like just albums in general, like hip hop albums, I would consider it a pretty strong like hip hop classic. I'm not sure everybody else would agree with that, but I would say that. I think it's a classic album to me. I was listening to it today, right? And I know almost every word on the album, and that's a pretty hard album to know every word to. You know what I'm saying? Considering the density of the lyrics and shit like that, and just how sophisticated a lot of the writing is. It's like large vocabulary words and very intense, rapping. So to know it, that like, and I don't listen to it all the time. In fact, I don't listen to it very often at all. But I could put it on right now, and I just can just go from the beginning to the end of it almost. Which I think says a lot about the album and its repeatability. I mean, it was definitely an album that got played a lot. That summer when it came out and on into the fall, and it continued to get a lot of play. I may actually tell you what I love and I don't like about it. The start of all their problems begin on that album. The first Wu-Tang album, was a very short record. It's not like super long. It's only, I think, 12 songs. And really, not everybody's on every song, right? And if you look at if you look at them more as like a band, and in hip hop, like the lyricist is the instrument. You know what I'm saying? You have the beat, and then you have the vocal. The vocal is the instrument. The beat is the beat, and it's very important. And and it has to create a mood, and it has to create a vibe, and it has to create something that it draws you in. But the lyricist is really the instrument that commands the attention. And on the first album, everybody was kind of put together very strategically. Like it really wasn't like a lot of songs where everybody was on every song. The second album, you kind of like feel like there are songs when there's like 6 people on a song, and it really only needs to be like 2. And it's like almost like a little bit bloated, where it was like almost trying to do too much. The mix, I agree with you, is not amazing. One of the reasons why I believe is because they, I think, made that album and mixed it, or at least recorded it in Pro Tools, because at that time, the digital technology was starting to come in, which had a big effect on how things like drums would sound. The first couple albums, I would imagine, some of it was probably done on, reel to reels or DATs, or could have even come through a 4-track. Like some of the stuff on Old Dirty Bastards, first album, like I'm almost 100% certain that stuff was recorded on a 4-track. Because you can just listen to it, and the simplicity of it, it's only like 1 or 2 tracks, and then it's very lo-fi, and it was almost like it was recorded on a 4-track or an 8-track recorder, and they transferred it to a DAT and they put it on a record. Maybe they brought it into a studio and touched it up a little bit, but for the most part, it's very simply made. Wu-Tang Forever, is like the technology was starting to get a little more complex. There was not many. I don't remember a lot of samples on that album. I mean, there were some, but I think it was the beginning of RZA starting to play around with a lot of synthesizers, and basically trying to replicate like a very hard sound with a soft instrument, and the kind of like the juxtaposition of those didn't always work on that record. You know what I'm saying? So it was a little bit of a different sound for them. So that's the first record where they're really like that, Liquid Swords and all that stuff. The whole album is like samples, so it does, that is definitely a big difference, and so when you listen to it, it grabs you a little differently. Reunited, is like a good example of the live drum sounds with what I believe might have been a string section, or possibly a synthesizer, and it being done really well. Some other songs where it might not have, I don't know, there's not that many songs on it that I think didn't really work. I mean, the only one that really jumps out at me is like Black Shampoo. That one is like, which I understand, in my opinion, like I know what you guys was going for with that, because that's like kind of an ode to like, sort of black, hair care and African oils and stuff like that. But that was a record that it didn't belong on there. You know what I'm saying? Like there are a couple others, but in general, it just could have been a little bit of a tighter album. It needed to be edited a little bit. A couple of people could have came off of songs, like Triumph is like a 5-minute single, 6-minute single, where everybody has like 16 bars, or 32 bars or 48 bars. I mean, everybody's rapping, and the beat continuously changes. And don't get me wrong, that's a classic record, as classic as it gets. But Protect Your Neck, everybody has like 4 bars on that, 8 bars. Like it's so much shorter, and the bars are so much more to the point. Like it's almost like what Jizza says. Like he has that line, where it's like, damn, I forget the line. It's like half something, twice strong. So it's all about like condensing things, and that's kind of where I feel like Wu-Tang Forever, if there's any criticism of it that I have at all, it might be that, But generally speaking, I think Wu-Tang Forever is a great album, Like I mean, I don't look at it in any way as like a bad album. I mean, it's like I said, it's a classic to me,
I think you said it perfectly, because the thing about Wu-Tang Forever is that it's still an album that whenever I do listen to it, like I don't listen to it as much, like yourself, but whenever I listen to it, I'm like, well, like what is it about? I mean, it's bloated, a little bloated in certain parts, but I'm always trying to figure out why it's bloated. I mean, other than like the songs, and I think you said the best way that, yes, on 36 Chambers, some people had, 4 bar verses. It wasn't entire 16s, if not more than that. And I do think that, to Wu-Tang Forever's credit, that's I mean, it's a lot of times that's like the high point of the album, like the fact that you can have Ghostface on Scary Hours, just keep going and going, and then they just have to fade the track out, or or the fact that we get to see Inspector Deck and Master Killer, kind of take on leading roles in certain songs, which you never really, exactly heard before, especially, Inspector Deck with the Tron verse. So the kind of freedom that they did have to roam around and be a bit more experimental. But then I do think in certain ways it was his downfall. So like I think me and Chris, we both agreed that Black Shampoo, maybe not. So certain things like that. But then at the same time you have Duck Season where, Raekwon just kind of went crazy. So yeah, but I think that, and then going back to the mix a little bit. I always have this feeling about the album, and that I'm sure that you're much more experienced than I am in this. It's something about the highs. Like the highs on the album are really, really high.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a sharp sounding album. I mean, like I said, a lot of that I think was just that, like that early experience with Pro Tools. I think some of it was even just like the clipping. Like digital distortion sounds a lot different than analog distortion, and I don't think people, at that early stage of the game, right? Like I don't think people realized that the digital distortion was very harsh sounding and like kind of, wasn't that comfortable to listen to. It gives you like a lot of ear fatigue, where you get like a little tired of listening to it. Analog distortion sounds really good. You want to push the meters into the red. You want to get a kick drum to clip, because it'll sound fuzzy and warm, and it's just like a different, it's a little bit of a different sound. I have to say though, while we were talking, I just pulled up the album on Wikipedia. I mean, I guess maybe it has more samples on it than I realized. The whole second album looks like the second CD seems like it was, a lot of samples. So maybe I'm wrong on that, which, I'm willing to concede, but I'm like looking through the track list, and I swear, I mean, of the songs I think that could get cut off is like Dog Shit, I think Hell's Windstaff, Black Shampoo. That's like, those are the only three things I would take off this album. I and then also just looking through some of the songs. I mean, yeah, some like Hell's Windstaff has 6 verses on it. You know what I'm saying? Like, yeah. Every song is just like so long. So and then just generally speaking, even though I'm talking about the samples and I'm talking about digital technology and all the shit, like I just think the beats themselves weren't as good, as the stuff that had been done on the previous albums. Like I said, before I came on here, I was listening to this album, and I happened to listen to a couple other Wu-Tang records, and I was just listening the other day, for no reason at all, just because I wanted to hear it. I was listening to Liquid Swords, and I was just like, the beats on there just are like, they send chills up your spine. You know what I'm saying? They're so incredible. Like they're just haunting. And they were like what we used to say. They were like just sick. The beats on Wu-Tang Forever aren't like that. You know what I'm saying? They're just beats. They're really good, but they aren't that next level like of what the shit was on the first couple albums. Between the first album and the solo albums, whether that be Iron Man or even Tikal, like just the beats just were like had a real like haunting quality to them. They were like eerie and spooky. I mean, even like the Gravediggers album, which I'm not even certain if RZA produced it, but I think Prince Paul produced.
Yeah.
Produced most of the Gravediggers album. I think RZA produced, if I'm not mistaken. I could be wrong. Yeah, I'm probably wrong. I think RZA produced Diary of a Madman, if I'm not mistaken. Like the first time I heard that, my mind was blown. I like it was just so sick sounding, and just hearing it on the radio was like you just ran to get your tape. You had to tape it. It was like, oh my God, what am I listening to? I don't feel like that was the case on Wu-Tang Forever. Nothing really, even Triumph. The beat is hot, but it's not. It doesn't hit you like those records did. Not at all.
Mm. Well, what is your favorite beat off this album?
Um, Man, I'm looking at it now. There's a lot of good. I'm saying there's a lot of good beats.
Mm.
Even, I mean, if I like run it down, I mean, I love Older Gods. That's a great one. I love It's Yours. Um, I love Impossible. Little Ghetto Boys. I love. Probably though, if I had to, my favorite would probably be Heaters. My favorite one. That might be one of my favorite Wu-Tang songs. Period. I mean, I think they should have ended the album with that song. That was like the first time I heard that record, I was like, oh man, that was like some shit. To me, that's maybe the only song on this album that is like on par with the stuff from right before this. Like I could have seen that on Only Built for Cuban Links or something like that, where it was just, just sick again. The other one last thing I'll say about what you were at, we were talking about some things that might, be little quality problems. The other big issue with Wu-Tang Forever is it didn't really have a theme.
Mm.
Like all the other Wu-Tang records had themes to them. Like Iron Man kind of like has a theme. Like if you listen to it, it's kind of got like a narrative running through it. Only Built has a narrative running. They're all concept albums. Liquid Swords is a concept album. To Cal, maybe a little bit less so. You know what I'm saying? Shimmy Shimmy Yaw's, not Shimmy Shimmy Yaw, Old Dirty's first album, kind of a concept album. Wu-Tang Forever, I don't know what is the concept. I'm not really sure. Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, it was almost like there was nothing left to prove for them because they were so on fire then. So it's missing that narrative thing that kind of like pulls it all together where you're like, okay, I see what you were going for here. It's a little all over the place, It's a great album, classic album, but it is missing that element, and that I think affected them a little bit, moving forward because it was like the first time where you could see like, the Wu-Tang, like the mythology of the group was starting to get lethargic, where like the kung fu shit and all that shit was not as prevalent, and it was just like it kind of left a lot of question marks in your head about where things were going.
Actually, before this, I got on with you. I was watching the promotional documentary that came out around the time of Wu-Tang Forever for the Clan, and I don't know, just fighting against the mainstream, pretty much Puffy, and saving the world. Whatever that really means.
For the most part, that was a big thing that summer, right? Was, because that was a year that Biggie passed away, and Puff was really, hip hop was going very, very mainstream at that point, so like the heights that Puff was taking it to, and the style of music that he was making was very, it was very, I don't want to say commercial, but it was very commercial, and it was very melodic. And I mean, all he was doing was, he was basically taking a blueprint that like Dr. Dre set. He was basically copying Dre, in some ways. He took, the what Dre did with like the Chronic, and was like, all right, I'm gonna take this format, which is basically doing sort of like R&B hip hop, and kind of making commercial rap records out of it. You know what I'm saying? They're doing it on the West Coast. I'm gonna do it on the East Coast. It just took a long time. You know what I'm saying? For that to really like become like a thing, you know what I'm saying, in hip hop. And Wu-Tang was like kind of like the kings of the, they were already commercial, but not commercial in that way. You know what I'm saying? Like, they were commercial like in a very unique and very authentic and very hardcore traditional hip hop way. And so they kind of were representing like this underground movement, of like really aggressive and very pointed lyricism. Um, and Diddy and those guys were like kind of the antithesis to that. But looking back on it, I mean, all that Diddy shit is like classic now to me.
Yeah.
Like I go and listen to it, I'm like, Jesus Christ, those albums are so much better than I remembered them being. Just because I was like too caught up in this shit, at the time, Like even Biggie, right? I mean, he had like even like Life After Death. I mean, it had like a little bit of a theme to it, and he made that record really before he passed away. So I feel like Wu-Tang was a little unfocused, you know what I'm saying? Like they just probably were just swimming in a lot of money at the time. And it was a lot of drama in hip hop back then, and it was really a lot of question marks about where, despite how popular they were, where a group like Wu-Tang fit in, because they weren't, I mean, like Biggie and the Frank White thing and all that shit, and like doing the mafia thing. I mean, that was literally him copying Raekwon, like, so, I mean, theoretically they started it, you know what I'm saying? But people were doing the mafia shit before them, probably just not to the level that they were, like the Wu Gambinos and all that stuff. I mean, they really popularized it. Back then it was just different, man. Now everybody copies each other, and like, you get a lot of credit for sounding like another person now. Back then everybody wanted to sound different. The whole thing was about doing different things, So Wu-Tang was like off on its own, and then they became like an island unto themselves. They became like the country of Wu-Tang, after that, where you had the affiliates, and you had the Wu-Tang, the Swarm, and all these different like offshoots, and yeah, they were kind of like a really a self-contained thing, and then everybody kind of copied that. Rockefeller was a copy of that. In a lot of ways, Bad Boy copied it. No Limit copied it. Everybody copied Wu-Tang. That format, the Diplomats, that format for how to make a rap group and do the splinter off thing, they were different for it, So, yeah, but overall, though, I mean, Wu-Tang Forever is, I think we can agree Wu-Tang Forever is a great album. You know what I'm saying? Like, in no way, shape, or form do I think Wu-Tang Forever is bad or anything. Like, I can put it on right now and run it front to back, and it's better than literally any album that has come out this year.
Like you, when it comes to like my favorite like beat off this album, it also doesn't come from RZA because Heaters, True Master produced Heaters, and my favorite beat off this album is Scary Hours, and that's produced by Fourth Disciple. Fourth Disciple, he's an amazing producer, and I do think he's like really slept on, like the stuff that he did with Killer Army and just like the stuff that he's doing now. Like I know he came out with the song with PD Crack and everything like that, but I always look forward to like a Fourth Disciple track on a Wu-Tang record, whether it's a solo record or a Wu-Tang Clan album in general. But yeah, so for my favorite tracks, I think overall favorite tracks overall, I think Scary Hours kind of sets the tone for me, and also because this is something that I've been talking about for I don't know how long, and this idea of Wu-Tang Sound, whereas I think that the Wu-Tang Sound that people kind of think of, I would argue that it doesn't really come from RZA. It comes from like a lot of the Killer Bees, and especially like Fourth Disciple, True Master, and Mathematics. They kind of like created this so-called Wu-Tang Sound, whereas RZA has always been experimental, and it's really hard to kind of pin him down to a particular, I mean, you can. Don't get me wrong, but like a solid general Wu-Tang sound, because if you ask me, like all of the solo records from the first wave of solo albums, they were all different in their own way, but like how you said, they all had this haunting sound. So I would say that if there is a Wu-Tang sound per se, When it comes to RZA, it's more of an aura than it is like a particular concrete sound that you can see in a Fourth Disciple or something like that.
Yeah, look, one thing is, you don't know, right? Like, heck, fucking True Master could have produced all of 36 Chambers. You really have no idea. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying he did, you know, or that Fourth Disciple produced, the first couple Wu-Tang albums. I'm just saying that it is the record business, and sometimes, people who made certain beats don't get the proper credit. I don't know. I don't know the situation, for sure. You know what I'm saying? RNS used to come to my studio a lot, and like RNS would claim he did a bunch of stuff, that he didn't get credit for, that RZA got credit for, and RNS taught RZA how to make beats. You know what I'm saying? So, I don't know. You know what I mean? Like who did what? I'm pretty sure, the credits are probably, pretty accurate, but you're right. You know what I'm saying? Like the elements, so to speak, they may be a little more responsible for some of that sound than RZA is. And RZA himself, I love RZA. You know what I'm saying? And I love his beats, and he's he's the best to me. You know what I'm saying? But RZA has a lot of weak shit. Let's just be honest, right? He's got a lot of beats that are just not good. So it's like you just have to be real about it. Like whether you're a fan or not, it's just some of his shit is just not hitting. And so when you look at some of the problems that they've had over the years, with them complaining about him, it's like you have to wonder, like, damn, did he even make those beats? Because how could this guy, who made all these classic records be making this weak shit? You know what I'm saying? Like maybe he didn't make those because the one time we allow him to make something, he makes like 8 diagrams or something like that. Which I should also say I like. I'm not. It's not that I don't like that record. I'm just using it as an example, as the Clan members themselves have said that they had issues with that album. I'm just saying, is this the same guy that made 36 Chambers? I don't know. You know what I'm saying? Like, just a theory.
Well, you are the very first person to ever because usually, when I bring up like the whole idea of the Wu-Tang Sound, people they say, well, no, RZA, is the reason for that sound, but it's an interesting topic. I guess overall though, so I think you said Impossible, you said Heaters. What are some of your other favorite tracks off this off the album overall? Fuck it.
I definitely think Little Ghetto Boys is one of the best songs on the album.
Yeah.
That's definitely, a favorite. Impossible has that, that great Ghostface verse. Probably one of your better, storytelling verses in hip hop. The City is a good record. You know what I'm saying? That one is like that Inspector Deck solo song. A little bit of a platform for him, I guess, was kind of trying to set him up a little bit for his solo record. The MGM is, a really strong song. I feel like, if I'm not mistaken, that's the song that kind of like is about the Tyson Holyfield fight.
Yeah.
And, I can listen to it now and it just brings back a lot of memories because I remember watching that fight on TV and all that. So yeah, that's on the second disc. On the first one, Scary Hours is up there. For Heaven's Sake, I always loved because it just had a very hard, kind of like aggressive, like stomping type of sound. It's very much like Clan in the Front. Just a very like. Almost you could see like a militaristic, type of sound to it. Visions is a song that I'm not 100% certain, I could have probably done without that song. Severe Punishment, also I'm not in love with, mean, it's cool. You know what I'm saying? It's not that amazing. I would say overall though, the second disc is a little better than the first one. Yeah, those are some of the ones that jump out at me. And then you have like A Better Tomorrow. That song I think is a message that, you know what I'm saying, kind of like message music and rap don't really always go together that well, but I think that was like them showing their sophistication and their age a little bit. You know, I would assume that at the time this album came out, although I don't remember exactly how old everyone was, but I would assume everybody was by then like around 27 or 28. Maybe like Jizza was the oldest one, maybe he was 30, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And even that I'm not so certain about. He might have been a little younger than that, you know. I mean, I feel like around that time, that's when your mind starts kind of, just as a person, you start kind of seeing things a little bit differently, and rap itself becomes less about what you want to say and more about just, some sort of outlying message about how you might see the world, you know. So I don't know. I feel like, that kind of, the message on that song kind of came across, obviously on their last official album, because that was what they called it. I mean, It's Yours is like one of the best Wu-Tang songs ever, you know what I'm saying? That was just, I always loved the video for that, where they're on the tour. I believe that was probably on that tour where they was like, we were Rage Against the Machine and all that. But they just look like they're having so much fun. That was like a kind of like a victory lap song, and it was just very simple, very kind of like not a very like complex song. It's just them rapping and just very powerful. Yeah, so that's one of my favorites as well.
Yeah, well, I would say that I think the first disc is stronger than the second one, but I think Scary Hours, Older Gods, and For Heaven's Sake, especially For Heaven's Sake, the same reason why you said it, kind of like gritty feeling. I'm assuming it's because of that that kind of synth they had, like RZA has throughout, like throughout in the background or whatever that thing is. Yeah, I think the first disc is really strong. I think that I could live without that intro though. It's too long. If it was about 2 minutes long, I probably wouldn't care that much. But it's. I can only imagine how it was. Like the kind of anticipation you guys had, like listening to it when it first came out, and then you had to get through like that first intro.
Yeah, I mean it wasn't like too bad because. We were at that time we were already listening, on a CD player. It wasn't like we was listening on a tape, so we could just skip it. You know what I'm saying?
This was fun, but I gotta have you back on again just for some other stories or just to talk about another album and everything like that. If you don't mind, but in the meantime, where can people find your writing? Where can people find you?
I mean, usually people just can keep up with me like on my Twitter account, which is / my name, Paul Cantor, PaulCantor, and I periodically just post links to my work there. I write a lot on a website called Medium, and you can always find my work there as well. More like personal writing, but some music writing as well. And yeah, that's really it. As far as anything else, I'm working on a book now, so hopefully, in the next, couple months, we'll have some news, about where people can, check that out. But yeah, I'm always pretty active, publishing a lot of different stuff. So just on my Twitter account, which is, where you can, find whatever I'm up to. I want to thank you for having me on. And allowing me to nerd out a little bit with you about about a great album, and a group that is my favorite group, and as far as I'm concerned, is like people. Because I recently wrote something about the new Wu-Tang album.
On Mass Appeal, right?
Yeah, and sometimes you're constrained a little bit by, you know, the limitation of just what you're trying to get across in an article, and sometimes the platform is not right for what you even want to say. But, you know, like, for years people have called Wu-Tang the rap Beatles and stuff like that. And like, they are not the rap Beatles. They are the rap Wu-Tang Clan. You know, like, Beatles is the Beatles, and like, we shouldn't compare, you know, hip hop groups to, you know, there's not no disrespect to the Beatles, because the Beatles are, you know, legendary in their own right, and for that generation, the Beatles, and future generations, the Beatles will always be the Beatles, you know. But we need to, you know, as a hip hop audience and a community, and just a generation of people, you know what I'm saying, black, white, you know, Indian, Arab, you know, Chinese, Korean, whatever. All of us grew up on this music, and, you know, we need to stop comparing, you know, rap groups to, you know, white groups from Liverpool, you know, England, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're shortchanging our, you know, the champions of our culture by doing that. You know, so we need to just acknowledge Wu-Tang is the fucking best rap group of all time. You know, I'm willing to debate that with people. You know, some people will say Public Enemy or NWA or Run DMC or any number of rap groups. You know what I mean? But Wu-Tang is the best at being Wu-Tang. You know, and that, you know, to me, that was something I wanted to say in that article, but it just wasn't really the space for it. You know what I mean? And like, you know, that's important, you know what I'm saying? Like, we're all getting older. Hip hop's like 40 years old or nearly, and, you know, we need to stop being like, you know, comparing shit to like white people shit, you know what I'm saying? And I'm saying that as a white person, you know? So yeah, that's it.
Well, cool. Well, this has been another edition of the Wu-Tang Podcast. You can check us out at Wu-Tang Podcast on SoundCloud, Wu-Tang Podcast on Twitter. Please rate and subscribe on Apple iTunes. Well, not Apple iTunes, Apple Podcasts, if you will. And if you want to come on the show, if you want to, you know, kick it with me, have some good old Wu talk or whatever like that, you want to talk about a particular album that you love or that you hate, hit me up at WuTangPodcast@gmail.com or at SingArtSuperior@gmail.com, or even on Twitter. I'm relatively active. I'm trying to be more active on social media. It's not really working the way I want it to, but nonetheless, hit me up if you want to. And with all that said, we are out. Peace.